And we're back with some more Rimworld. And today we're going to be testing out melee weapons to find out which one is the best. This is all because of this new strong melee damage gene, which increases melee damage by 50%. And it's thrown all of the regular knowledge just out the window in terms of what's the best weapon to use. Now, there are basically two best weapons now. If you want to kill centipedes the fastest as you possibly can, then a Persona Monosword Legendary is your best bet. If you want to kill anything that's not a centipede as fast as you possibly can, Persona Zeus Hammer Legendary is your best bet. If you want to wipe out tribals as quickly as you possibly can, and you can't afford either of those weapons or you can't get them, for wiping out tribals, yep, Legendary Uranium Mace. Pretty much actually any humanoid in existence. If you want to wipe them out, Legendary Uranium Mace. If you want to wipe out centipedes as quickly as possible, Legendary Plasteel Longsword. The Legendary Plasteel Longsword now kills centipedes faster than the Uranium Mace. I don't know. I felt like I was taking crazy pills when I started doing this, but I'll show you the data and you can see what I mean. Now, remain calm, don't worry. It obviously gets an awful lot worse than this. But for now, the only things you need to know is, see this here? This number here tells you how many minutes it took for one pawn to kill 25 centipedes wielding a Persona Monosword that was of legendary quality. And that is actually the best weapon at killing it, so it gets a 100% rating. And then everything else is rated out of the 100% that that weapon got. This here is just how many minutes in total it takes to kill a single centipede. So it takes 25 minutes for this weapon to kill a centipede. It takes 49 minutes, for example, for Uranium Mace Masterwork to kill a centipede. This is sort of where we baseline it from. What I really care about is how fast can I kill centipedes, because they're usually the thing that takes the longest to kill, and you're the ones that are fighting the longest with. And it turns out, Persona Monosword Legendary. No real surprises here. I was kind of expecting that, to be honest. The Zeus Hammer came in very close, about 9% behind. And then the Persona Monosword Masterwork, and then blah blah blah. But the real surprising kicker here was the sword. A Legendary Plasteel Sword comes in right there. It's about the same damage level as a Persona Plasma Sword Legendary, which is kind of crazy when you think about it. As well as that, the Uranium Mace Legendary comes way down here, like just incredibly further down. This is like 140 percentage points for the sword, 140% of max, 168, that's 28 percentage points lower down is the Uranium Mace, which made no sense to me. That's not how this is supposed to go. But we'll get back to more on all of this later. Anyway, the Uranium Warhammer I included because I was curious. I also threw in the spear because there was some questions about whether or not the spear was more effective than the sword. Turns out, no. Spear's not so good at actually pretty much anything. They kind of suck in general. There's the other spear legendary. Now, I'm going to say Uranium Maces and Plasteel Swords a lot. The reason for that is you can choose what materials to make those weapons out of, and what you make them out of really counts. For example, if you make your mace out of uranium, it will swing 10% slower, because it's heavier. However, its blunt damage goes up by 50%. This is a net positive for your DPS, so if you're making a blunt weapon, you make it out of uranium. If you're making a sharp weapon, however, you make it out of plasteel. This actually increases its sharpness by about 10%, but it also decreases the cooldown by 20%. So it swings 20% faster and does 10% more sharp damage. However, it does decrease your blunt, so yeah, don't use that on your maces or you'd be shooting yourself in the foot, so to speak. Anyway, for the purposes of this, anytime you see sword, it's a plasteel sword. Anytime you see mace, it's a uranium mace. Anytime you see warhammer, uranium warhammer. Anyway, this confused me quite a bit, and then I decided to test it out on tribals. 100 tribals, same test. And the results are even more confusing. The Uranium Mace Legendary is up here. The Plasteel Sword Legendary is down here. So the Uranium Mace is better at killing people than the sword. These are tribals, as in they had no armor on them. This is a completely naked guy. We bet him down. Every single time, the mace came out ahead. As well as that, the Persona Zeus Hammer is now in the lead, which was mildly surprising. Turns out it's about... But what was even more surprising is the Persona Zeus Hammer Masterwork also beat out the Persona Monosword Legendary. So both the Zeus Hammers came in ahead of the legendary Persona Monosword. Not by a huge margin. There is a little bit of margin for error here, so that Persona Zeus Hammer might be just squeaking by on a minor bit of a technicality. But we'll come back to more on why this is all happening later on. Just, let's check out one more thing. This here is 100 pirates wearing a flak vest. And when we chuck this in, things got even more weirder. Anyway, Persona Zeus Hammer Legendary is way out in front. Persona Zeus Hammer Masterwork comes just behind it. And then the Uranium Mace Legendary beat out the Persona Monosword Legendary. And not by a small bit, like that's about a 26 minutes margin. Still within the margin of error. You gotta remember, we're only killing 100 people, so there's chances for things to happen. But the legendary mace, uranium mace did really, really well here, like incredibly well. This also confused me a lot. The legendary sword is way down here. It is horribly losing on pretty much all fronts. In fact, things got way, 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 way worse for the sword. In fact, as far as I can see, the legendary uranium mace does really well against everything that isn't a centipede, which is not how it's supposed to work. Anyway, so what's going on here? Why is it working out this way? Well, it turns out it has to do with damage types, and what really revealed it to me was the spear. You see, the spear here has a weird... Oh, 1 second. Wait until everyone catches up. I'm going to have a look at a few corpses here, and we've just had 300 enemies try and move, so things might be a little bit sluggish for a second. Okay, we got enough corpses that we can show why this is happening, or at least make a very educated guess as to why the hammer is doing so well against naked targets. Now, if we check out this corpse here, you'll see that they got hit in the right leg. Body part is entirely missing, and you can see their cause. Waffelboscht Setsuya in the right leg, savagely. However, if we check out their pelvis, it says Waffelboscht Setsuya in the right leg, savagely. And if we check out their torso, it seemed same thing again. This one hit destroyed their leg, passed through to their pelvis, and then hit their torso, insta-killing them. In other words, a hit to the leg killed them. In fact, over here, we've got another one where they hit them in the right leg. This also passed through and went straight through to the torso and crushed their torso in the ribcage. In fact, it completely vaporized their leg and their torso in one swift hit. Yeah, that's sort of what happens. Here's another one where Bruise from the Zeus hammer hit them in the right leg and killed them. What's happening here is this weapon has a head damage of 76.7. So when it hits with the head, it has a really good chance of doing carry-on damage. Hit someone in the toe, you can take off their entire leg and most of their torso in one hit. Hit him in the hand, you take off the arm, the shoulder, and most of the torso with it. Hit him in the head, you might as well knock him into the ground. Now, every hit doesn't necessarily pass through. There's a percentage chance based on this type of damage. But what's normally happening is it hits something, passes straight through, and kills it. So despite something like, say, this sword over here having superior damage and faster attack, which means it should do more which should have excellent damage, lots of chances to kill, and hitting more often, so increasing its likelihood of killing the person really quick and not having to do repeat strikes. That means nothing here, because the problem is it's not getting as much pass-through damage. The best way to demonstrate that here is the spear. The spear has one attack type, stab, and the stab has no pass-through damage. I'm going to refer to pass-through as anything where it can pass through a leg to another body part or through an arm or something like that. Basically, all the spear people, you look at them, they basically just got stabbed. Let's find one. Ah yes, spear, stabbed to the torso. Yep, that's it, impaled the heart. Right leg, they actually got stabbed in the leg. Everything you find on spears is basically just one direct stab. There is no pass-through damage from the spear. So any excess damage, completely wasted. So if you hit someone in the leg for 62 damage, you've killed the leg, but that's it. You just have to hit him again, and keep hitting him again until you hit something vital. Hammer gives you multiple chances with every single hit. Now the sword is a little bit quirky here in that one. You see, it's got an edge and a point. If it hits with the point, it just stops dead. It can't have any pass-through damage. If it hits with the edge, that damage actually carries over, which is why swords fall off way less than spears. Big thanks to Sedalina Sarah for putting up a great comment on this that explains, well, basically got me on the right track for figuring out why these results were just so bizarre. But all you need to remember is, if you're dealing with a small, low-damage target like humans, a smash pass-through weapon like a hammer is excellent. But if you're dealing with a large, fat target like a centipede, centipedes have massive pools of hit points, which means something like a sword or even a plasteel sword has no overkill. What's happening here is you're getting overkill on limbs, and that overkill is not getting passed on to actually do the killing the pawn. Whereas here, they're not doing as much damage, but any damage they do definitely gets applied. This is why bladed weapons are better against centipedes or large targets, and why bladed weapons do worse against light targets. And armor doesn't really matter. Let's just check this here. Centipedes, it seems, have an armor of 72%. Yeah, this is kind of pointless. I mean, a plasteel spear legendary has armor penetration of 82% on its stab, so all of its stabs go straight through that. Plasteel longswords have 80 to 90%. Like, pretty much all the high-end weapons just completely ignore the armor of centipedes. Yeah, so you can kind of just forget about that. It's all about how much damage you can do. So going back to the data, this all starts to make an awful lot more sense. The mono swords are doing really well in here because they don't have to worry about the armor penetration. They've got, like, I've put the armor penetration over here, 148% armor penetration means the mono sword just slices through things ridiculously well. The hammers do okay. The problem is their DPS, or their damage per second, is just a little bit too low when it comes to giant targets like this. This is why the uranium mace does so poorly. It actually has low damage. The great thing about it, though, is it does have pass-through damage. That's why it does so well on softer targets. So when it comes to tribals, we're seeing something here. A lot of blunt damage up the top. The Zeus hammers basically smash through things and kill them. You're still not going to beat the Persona Monoswords too much. They've got that 1.6 second cooldown, which means they attack pretty frequently, giving them more chances to down an enemy. Even if they're not going to have pass-through damage, that faster attack rate really helps out. With the Uranium Mace doing so well, it might be a little bit high up there, but it's still very, very close to a Monosword Legendary. It's a pretty decent weapon. And even the Mace Masterwork does really well. The swords just completely tank. The problem with swords is they just don't get off enough pass-through damage, and as well as that, it seems that the pass-through damage they do is affected quite heavily by any armor. So this actually gets even worse when we pass over to the armored targets. Back to the pirate targets again, and you can see the swords here are getting 169% for a legendary sword compared to the best weapon at killing the pirates. However, that's a bit of a drop. It's 151% at killing tribals. So this means that there's a bigger difference between them and the best optimum weapon. And the Masterwork one is down at 178%, and it's 163% at killing tribals, so this is also a bigger drop. So the more armored a target, the more the sword sort of drops off. But this only counts for light targets, as in small targets that have small pools of hit points to draw from. Large targets with large pools of hit points like bosses and centipedes, those things, you're just going to get all your damage and apply it directly to it. You don't have to worry about pass-through because the body parts are so large, you've got plenty of stuff to sink your teeth into. I started doing a bit of testing with Scythers as well. And Scythers are an interesting test case. Unfortunately, I didn't get time to test them all. Due to an error in my testing methodology, I had to try out 2 days worth of data collection. Yeah, that was incredibly painful. So I sort of ran out of time on testing these. But it basically carries through what we've already seen so far. What you're dealing with here with Scythers is they have about 45 hit points on their thorax, and they have about 40 hit points on their limbs. They basically have more hit points. There's more to sink your teeth into. And despite having a little bit of armor on them, the sword does much better. In fact, the sword does better against Scythers than it does against naked tribals. Namely because there's just more to sink your teeth into, there's less overkill, so that sort of hurts the hammers and helps the blades a little bit more. That's why the mace actually ended up below the Persona Monosword Masterwork. Yeah, well, that's my theory anyway. So I think the theory is pretty solid. And what this sort of means is when it comes to taking out humans, whether they be pirates, heavily armored or not, when it comes to pikemen, lancers, all of the low-end mechanoid scum, mace, uranium mace masterwork, uranium mace legendary early game, that's probably your best bet. And when it comes time to upgrade your weapons, well, things get a little bit more complicated. When should you upgrade and what weapon should you pick? First up, the reason things have flipped on their head so much is the melee damage factor bonus from this strong melee damage. A 50% damage bonus strongly favors maces and hammers. That extra carryover damage just means they're doing way more damage than before. In the past, their carryover damage was much smaller, which meant they didn't have as much carryover damage, which meant it wasn't as noticeable, and swords had a bit of an advantage. This strongly favors maces, hammers, that type of thing. Early game, you will be able to produce relatively early uranium maces and long swords. You can only produce excellent ones unless you've got ideology installed. Well, you can produce better with inspirations and stuff like that, but if you want to reliably produce masterwork longswords and maces, your best bet, get ideology DLC, get human primacy. This gives you action to the production specialist. Make sure you select production specialist as a role. Then once you've got a production specialist, you do your little ritual to turn them into one, and this gives you a +1 quality bonus on all of your crafting or construction. You're then going to have to work really hard to get their crafting up nice and high. If you've got ideology installed, I would recommend going around raiding a few tombs, finding yourself a genie that has a decent crafting skill and a construction of about 6. If you don't have if you can't find one without the construction, maybe make sure you have a constructor bot, because a constructor bot can make the marble altar. You need a marble altar if you want to turn them into a crafting specialist, or is it the science one? Whatever. Try and get them with construction as well. It would be nice. If you can't, then make sure you've got a constructor bot. But this allows you to get your hands on a crafting specialist so that you can produce these weapons relatively early. If you want to kill centipedes and they're the thing that are giving you the most trouble, long swords. Everything else, mace. So knowing what we now know, time to make some educated decisions on when you should upgrade and what to. If you have masterwork swords or masterwork maces, I would recommend you hold out till you can get your hands on either a good Persona Monosword or an excellent Persona Zeus Hammer. that is going to give you an upgrade. You'll actually be taking a down step on some of your centipede killing in some instances, or there's a little bit of a balancing act here, but by and large, it will generally be an upgrade. However, if you are finding that, let's just say, centipedes are your biggest problem and the things you're spending most of your time killing with your melee people, then maybe get just stick with the monoswords for a while, or go from swords to monoswords. It's probably safer. I find centipedes are my big concern. However, if you've got your hands on a legendary mace or a legendary sword, you're probably just going to want to hold out till you hit a masterwork. You're going to need a masterwork or better item to actually replace them. And that's where ideology comes in again. You see, when you reform your ideology, what you can do is you can go in here and you can say, ooh, I would like to have some relics attached to my religion. And what you can do then is just say, we will remove this one and we will add a relic. Any relic you choose that is a weapon will be a legendary quality weapon. I mean, you could pick something like, say, a Persona Monosword, and that Persona Monosword will be legendary when you find it. Finding it, however, is a little bit trickier. You will get the quest to retrieve it, but then you have to wait until they give you the 5 follow-on quests. There is 5 follow-on quests to find the relic, and then there's another mission you will have to do to caravan and get to it. Some people don't like caravans. If you don't like caravans, you're going to hate this one. However, there is ways around this. Some of the missions you get, you won't like them. If it says, hey, send 8 people in a shuttle to go to a location, maybe fail that one. If it says send 16 people in a shuttle to go somewhere and pick something up, definitely fail that one unless you want to face like 100 bugs or like 30 plus centipedes on a foreign tile with no backup. Just avoid them. Ones that allow you to go into villages and look at their terminals, just bring a jump jet pack or invisibility and a jump jet pack, and you can pretty much skirt your way through those. By and large, you will have to do 5 missions. It will take a bunch of time, but at the end of it, you will get a guaranteed source of legendary weapons. As well as that, the moment you get the mission, you can actually look it up and see what type of traits it's going to give you. If you don't like the traits it's giving you, get more religious points, reform, remove the weapon, add in a new one, and you can get a whole new quest and see again if you get the traits you're looking for. It is a little bit slow, it is a bit time consuming, but it's the only guaranteed way of getting yourself your hands on some legendary ones. Barring that, you can get quests to get weapons. However, the odds of getting them are quite slim. They're pretty rare and far between, and getting good ones pretty horrible. When it comes to actually purchasing them, you can actually go around and buy them in shops. For example, you can buy Persona Zeus Hammer normals. It is unlikely you can find an excellent one, but it is possible. For example, there is a Persona Monosword excellent available for purchase. However, you will only get these in Empire Towns. Empire Towns are the only ones that seem to stock excellent, but normal places won't stock any of the Persona swords. They'll only stock the normal ones, as in the non-Persona variants. However, you can find Masterwork Monoswords very rarely in places, so if you see one of those, a plain Masterwork sword is actually pretty good. One thing to do is just check out the damage and compare it to your swords. However, be aware, if someone is actually holding the weapon, it changes its damage. For example, EP Geek is actually holding their weapon here, and if we check on under here, you'll see it's got a damage of 55 or 25.87. However, if we click on one on the ground, you will find it has a damage of 17.25. The 50% damage bonus will be applied in here if the person is wielding it. So do be aware of that when you're checking out the weapons. Look at swords, just compare the DPS. Look at maces, compare the DPS. A higher DPS mace will beat out whatever DPS mace you're using right now. Higher DPS sword, blah, blah, blah. Just gets a little bit more complicated when you're trying to compare and contrast maces versus swords. Alright, I think we covered all the good stuff. This is basically a snapshot of what you need to know. What replaces what you should get, what you need to kill who. The rest of it is all going to be pretty much how we did the testing and testing methodology if anyone wants to try and replicate the results to make sure I'm not taking crazy pills. Because honestly, when I saw those results first, I was like, that makes no sense. But yeah, it seems to work out based on what I've learned since. But before we go into all of that, let's just go over what I messed up. Yeah, turns out this is all the data I was collecting before. Yeah, this all is trash now. I can't use any of this because when I was doing the testing, I used a character that was 15.5 years old. Their damage hadn't fully matured. When they become 18, it actually changes the amount of, like, as they get older, their age maxes out at 18, at which point they're fully mature for melee damage and speed and a bunch of other things, it seems. So by the time I realized that I already had 2 days worth of data and I had to trash it all because that extra damage is very important for maces and hammers, and it changed everything drastically. For testing centipedes, we grabbed 75 centipedes and we stuck them into an area like this. Oh, damn it. 1 second. I have actually a little bit of plasteel at the front to keep that door wedged open. There you go. There are 75 centipedes. There are 75 centipedes in each one of these rows. We have 3 people at the end wielding the weapon we're trying to test. And it is 1 minute to midnight. So when we hit the play button, everything kicks off and they start killing each other. And done. The only downside to this is the first ones that are spawned in have a tendency to mill around. So you're going to need to stick around at the start and do a little bit of walling in. And that is how we tested centipede damage. Since there's 75 centipedes and there's 3 pawns, that means each one is basically killing 25 apiece. Also helps to make sure we're getting a good accurate reading because I originally used 1 pawn versus 25. Now since this time started at 1 hour, that means every single minute you can count it up here, and then we can use that in our calculations to figure out how many minutes it takes on each one of them. At the same time, we have a psychic drone going on at the moment, so all of them are nice and happy. They all started high on go juice. So every single one of them is high on go juice for 34 hours, or 36 hours, I believe. They also are psychically invisible for 4 days, and they have psychic focus for 4 days. This is all thanks to the character editor mod. So basically the enemies can't strike back at them. We don't have to worry about them getting injured. At the same time, they have bionic arms. This is actually important for testing because you're going to replace your brawler's arms at one point because their fingers will get knocked off, and when they have their arms on, it does affect their damage. When it comes to striking targets, oh god, let's not get too deep into the weeds here, but there's basically two attacks. There's their main attack, which is the head, the highest damage one, and then there's their secondary attack or their mid attack. They will use their main attack 75% of the time and their mid attack 25% of the time, which is why you still see those handle pokes. However, if your bionic arm is doing, say, 14 damage and your mid attack is doing 12 damage because it's the hilt of a sword or something like that, you'll end up using your bionic arm instead, which can affect the damage numbers. Also, the bionic arm has a different cooldown time, so it can affect all sorts of things. I was just going to assume everyone's going to have bionic arms at some point, and it was just more even for the damage. So in this instance, yeah, all of our testing pawns are going to be invisible so they can't get hit, and because of the high on go juice and of all of the things they've got on top of them, they basically have almost no chance to miss. If we check under melee DPS, we can see they have max manipulation bonus, maximum sight bonus, and yeah, they're basically just going to hit with everything they throw at the enemies. We're not trying to test whether or not they're going to miss very much, we're trying to test how much damage they do when they do hit. I'll throw up this save. If you want to test any weapons or redo any of my testing, it's all there, help yourself. Oh. And yes, they're all 18. This here is how we tested pirate data. And the thing about pirates is they don't always have a flak vest. About 37% of the pirates in testing had flak vests on them, but I decided to include them on basically all of them just because it was a more even test that way. And you can see there is 100 in that row, there is 100 in that row, there is 100 in every single row. If you actually just select them all, select all the things on the map, there should be 500 and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 people. Exactly. So, with 100 in each row, they all come down here and attack these. Now, what I've done is I've left them off the leash. Undraft them, so they're actually attacking. Every single one of these pawns is set to flee in panic already by the actual dev tools. At the same time, I also made sure they had no health conditions, and I genetically engineered them to be dead calm and gave them mark-out metabolism. That way their hunger meter doesn't fall as fast, and there's no chance of them having social fights. Since they're fleeing, they shouldn't have social fights, but I decided not to take any chances. In early testing, the social fighting caused a bunch of problems. So what you can do is, at the start of this, I'll put up the save as well, you can just go in here using character editor and you can change the weapon they're wielding and then let them loose. And then once they've killed all of the enemies in their stack, you can pause the game, note what time it took them to, and then you count up the minutes, and that's how you figure out how quickly they can kill 100 targets. This here is tribal testing. Save is also included. It's actually the exact same character, slightly edited. It's the same one again, dead cam. They're all fleeing in panic. They have no health conditions, and gear-wise, they are not wearing anything. This way, it's a completely naked test so that you can smash as many of them as possible. And done. I'll include this save as well. Literally the exact same thing for scythers. Just all chucked down along here. As you can see, it's just 100 scythers in every single row. They're all coming down here to the end. Time them. Count it up, see how they do, change the weapons at the start. You might have noticed an absence of the Persona Plasma Sword's abilities to kill humans, which seems like a glaring oversight considering it should be pretty decent at them. Turns out if you stack 100 enemies up on top of one tile, and then hit them with a fire-starting weapon, it's hilarious. It really is. Like, just watching them all run around in flames was brilliant. However, I don't think it's an accurate representation of how it would be used in a real fight. And I think its overwhelming power is only usable in very, very, very select scenarios where you can keep someone invisible for a very, very long period of time so that you can do this. Unfortunately, I don't think that's a reasonable combat thing, and since we can't really test it any other way, it sort of got left out. I regret nothing, though. I would test it again. Totally worth it. Anyway, I'm going to cut this out here. I hope this is at least mildly informative for you, and good luck.